Hi there, Dr. Carmen McGuinness here with you. I'm just going to go check out that bird sound and maybe get a picture of the bird, and then we'll be back to talk about self-blame versus self-forgiveness. See you in just a moment. Hi there, Dr. Carmen McGuinness back with you. Wow, what an amazing little bird. I have to spend some time later and try to identify it. Beautiful call, and not a bird that I've heard or seen around here in my garden these 22 years that I've lived in this house, so I'm super excited. So anyway, on to today's topic. Today we are going to talk about self-blame versus self-forgiveness with a little bit of blaming others mixed in, because that is part of the mix when we talk about blame of any sort. So I recall being a very young girl and accidentally, quite by accident, as young children do, breaking my Swinger camera. Now, for those of you who are younger, perhaps much younger than I, you might not know what a Swinger camera was. It was a Polaroid thing. It, the pictures came out right away, and you'd let them sit for, I think, 2 minutes, and then you'd peel back the dealy-doo, and boom, there was your picture. It was like magic back in the olden days. Anyway, I had this cool Swinger camera. We were living in Italy, in Tuscany, and my parents had bought the camera for me. And we lived in a beautiful country home with a garden wall that looked out over the Autostrada, which is the highway that went through Tuscany between Florence and Siena. And I left my camera sitting on the wall and was called in to dinner, went off to dinner, and left my camera there overnight. Well, in the morning, when we thought, oh gosh, where's Carmen's camera, and started looking around, and I remembered I'd left it out there. When it hadn't rained or anything. It can be very dry in Tuscany. So I went out there to get it, and it wasn't there, and my father and I climbed over the wall and sort of made our way down as far as you could go before you'd fall off a cliff, and there was my camera. It had tumbled maybe 60 feet down over the rocks of Tuscany, and it was quite crashed up. It was not redeemable. We'll just leave it at that. It could not be repaired. So when we came in with the camera and I told my mother what had happened, she said to me, "Are you sorry you left your camera on the wall?" My thoughts were very confused at that point, because to me, as a 12-year-old, the only time one is sorry is when one has done something to someone else, something that requires forgiveness. Sorry to who, I thought. And it was that very afternoon, at the very young age of 12, that I discovered self-blame. I wanted, at least a little, to blame my mother for not having reminded me to bring in my camera. Fast forward several decades, and Dr. McGuiness understands very well that it's so much easier to blame others than oneself. We just don't want to accept the blame if it might be someone else's fault. So off it goes to them. And blame of others we often do, when we should instead share in the responsibility for something. And today, as a relationship therapist, I understand very well the he said, she said, he did, she did, and back to the beginning, and the first cause thing that can happen in the therapy room and in one's mind and heart. But is that actually the point? Is he said, she said, and back to the beginning, actually the point? Does the point, the blame, lie in some forgotten or never even noticed event in the past, often many, many years and decades ago? These are very deep waters indeed, and we see how these ponderings can eat up entire lifespans, even generations of families and friends. What if the first cause had simply been forgiven, and we had avoided the he said, she said, and he did, she did, and back to the very beginning, and just that first thing had been forgiven? Is it not simply the fault of the one who failed to forgive to begin with when these things go on and on and on? Or is it a matter of balance, a kind of karmic scale? And if that, need we even remember the insults, the hurts, the injuries, and the first cause? If it's all on the scale being weighed, as we're trying to remember, as we're trying to hold it fresh in our memories and hearts, there it is on the scale, being weighed. This is why forgiveness of others doesn't always work, doesn't always make us feel better. We forget to forgive ourselves. When we realize that every mistake belongs to the universe, that things happen, that there are events that go back and forth. There is not just he and she, there is life spinning around and within them. Today, this could be almost anything. It could be children being born, it could be children with disabilities being born, which is one of the things that's happened in my life. It could be job problems, it could be career problems, it could be problems with a company that we own or that we're invested in. It could be health problems. There are so many things today that can keep us focused on other things when we should be tending to home and forgiving one another. So is it really fair to point the blame at someone else or ourselves when life happens? I had a client recently who blames herself because her home situation is such that she cannot take her ailing father with Alzheimer's into her home. She had to place him in memory care. But the reasons were because of all the things that were completely out of her control. And we had to walk through that to get her to the point of forgiving herself for her situation. It should be considered that instead of blame, self or other, a star could begin to form. Let us consider the image of a star. I use this particular image because it strikes me that at any point there are so many different directions that things could go. Some of these are within our control, some of these are within the control of others around us, which we must accept is not our control because we cannot control others. And some of them are within the control of other things entirely. Let's just call it the universe. Those jobs, those health problems, those things we talked about. I use that image of a star because it's like a many-pronged burst of awareness that emerges when we begin to think of blame in this way, or shall we say responsibility. Emanating from that star are all the possibilities, how things might have gone, what we might have done instead. And on each tip of the star is a future moment unrealized. Now, this might sound like looking back, coulda, shoulda, woulda, and many might get stuck right there instead of following the star out to the ends of those prongs. But for others, it's an exploration. It's self-work. It's what we call in psychology the work. And with that self-work comes the lessons. And these, my friend, are worth recording, keeping, and moving forward with, rather than blame. So how is it done? How does one explore the many prongs of the star of forgiveness, if we can call it that, without getting caught up in the past, wallowing in blame of self or others? According to the law of conservation, it's basic physics that energy never dies. However, it can be converted. So if we, for instance, turn self-blame into regret, we have effectively converted the energy that does us harm. Self-blame is not good for us. Into one that reminds us instead of what we should not do going forward. In other words, a lesson. Do not leave your camera on the garden wall, little Carmen. And by the way, I never did again, and not even a cell phone camera. And I'm pretty conscientious with my possessions. Anyway, regret is just one example. And although it is a tough pill to swallow, it's nothing so difficult as some of the others. Like, for instance, converting blaming Mother into anger at Mother for not having reminded us. And what's the lesson there? Can't trust Mother to take care of my stuff, which, if swallowed, grows into can't trust Mother and eventually can't trust, when instead you might have simply accepted the responsibility and, yes, the blame, felt regret, learned a life lesson, forgiven yourself, and carried on. So we see that blame is indeed part of the mix. We cannot forgive ourselves until we accept at least part of the blame, at least our share of it. So I know this has been a childish example, a little girl's camera, many decades ago on another continent far, far away. But there are others that are more current, and we can well imagine them. Being an attachment therapist and a relationship coach, I deal with these often. There is often blame of parents that are long dead. There is often blame of spouses that are long divorced, having injured us many decades ago. There is often very real and very raw, shall we say, blame of things that are happening right now, things that are more recent. But these things can be overcome. These energies can be explored as a star, a many-pronged star. We can look into which issues are ours and which issues are theirs without being swallowed up by a volcano into the past, instead bursting forward, emanating like a star, all of the possibilities, all of the things that we might have done, not coulda, woulda, shoulda, but instead learning lessons from what we did do and what we did not do, and considering how we might move forward in the future. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend and a wonderful week. I will see you on Wednesday for my midweek sneak peek. Until then, be safe and happy. See you soon. If you find my videos helpful, I hope you'll also consider purchasing my online course or print manual, Raising Your Inner Child. These are both available on my website. I'll put links in the description box. Thanks again for viewing today. See you soon.